think we're going to get started now. Hello and welcome to Connecticut's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI, Program Solicitation Public Information Meeting. We are recording this webinar, so if you aren't able to tune in for the whole event, or you think that a colleague would benefit from seeing this presentation, you'll be able to find a link to this recording on our NEVI website and also on Connecticut DOT's Virtual Public Meeting Archive website. The intention of today's meeting is to go over Connecticut's NEVI LOI Phase 1 solicitation. This includes reviewing what information will be collected in the LOI, what documents will need to be emailed to us, and at the end, we'll have time for people to ask questions about the LOI and the process. Okay, so if you have questions during the webinar, we ask that you put them in the Zoom question and answer box, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. If you find you don't have time to ask your question, or you think of a question later, you can reach out to us anytime via email. Our email address is on this slide, or you can leave a voicemail on the project manager's phone. In addition, DOT will also be providing office hours in October for folks to come in and ask questions about the LOI. This is all virtual, but we'll be providing data for those dates at the end of the webinar. As in the past, we will be putting all the NEVI updates on our Connecticut NEVI webpage, which the link is included on this page. All right, so if you're new to Zoom, or if you're trying to access the captions and subtitles, these instructions should help you. To turn on this feature, select the CC button at the right, on the bottom right corner of your screen. This turns on the captioning. Then choose the language by selecting the settings wheel next to the CC button. Select captions, subtitles, and you can select the desired language. So these are the directions to find the Zoom question and answer box. Like I mentioned earlier, we would appreciate that any questions you have during the presentation go into the Q&A field, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. For those of you who are joining via phone, you can dial *9 during the question and answer section at the end of the webinar, and that will raise and lower your hand, and the team will call on you. All right, here's Connecticut DOT's Title VI notice. The Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, and national origin in accordance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Any person who believes she or he has been aggrieved by any lawful discriminatory practice under Title VI may file a complaint with the Connecticut Department of Transportation. There are directions on this slide outlining the procedure to file a Title VI complaint. This slide also covers Title VI, but the words are in Spanish. We're just going to leave this up for a couple moments for people who want to look at this. Okay. Here is the agenda for today. I will introduce you to the speakers you'll be hearing from. There will be a very brief overview of the NEVI program. We'll give you an overview of the solicitation, including who's eligible and the program requirements. Then the application process will be discussed, including how you can find the form, what type of information we're looking for, the attachments that we would like to see included in the LOI process. And at the end, there will be time for you to ask questions and provide answers. And finally, we'll share with you what's next and how you can stay informed. All right, so here's the team that you'll be hearing from today. Myself, Jen Riley, I serve as a transportation planner too at the Connecticut DOT, and I also serve as Connecticut's NEVI program manager. Joining me today is Jackie Murdoch, who is a planning discipline leader at CDM Smith, and also Chelsea Zakis, who is an environmental planner at Fuss and O'Neill. We'll hear from them in just a moment. So for many of you, this is not your first Connecticut DOT NEVI webinar or rodeo. And since most of this information is easily found on our DOT NEVI webpage, I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide, but I do want to tell you that the overarching goal of NEVI as a whole is for states to take the $5 billion that Congress passed as part of the Federal Infrastructure and Investment Act back in 2021 to support the expansion of a nationwide electric vehicle charging network. You're going to hear a lot about the NEVI minimum standards, which you see referenced in this slide. These standards help ensure that each state is working with the same minimum requirements of what a fully built out fast charging network will look like across the country. I would highly, highly recommend anyone who is going to apply to Connecticut's a letter of intent and has plans to use federal funds to install EV charging to please read and understand these minimum standards, because all NEVI federal projects will have to abide by these minimum standards. Connecticut has been allocated $52 million of formula funds for NEVI over a 5-year time frame from the IIJA. And DOT will be administering the funds. For phase 1, which is what this program is talking about, this LOI process, we anticipate about $15 million will be available to complete the build out of the DC fast charging network along Connecticut's alternative fuel corridors. For those that have been following the NEVI process, know that in order for Connecticut to receive formula funds from the Federal Highway Administration, the state had to submit a deployment plan to Federal Highway. We have a webpage specifically dedicated to the NEVI plan, and there you will find copies of the fiscal year 22-23 plan and also Connecticut's fiscal year 24 plan, which we were just notified on Friday that it has been approved by Federal Highway. So that was good news. All right, the first phase of Connecticut's NEVI funding supports expanding EV charging on private sites along Connecticut's alternative fuel corridors, which consists of about 350 miles of the state's interstate system. The map on the right shows the existing NEVI qualifying stations as green triangles and the proposed DC fast charger locations as purple stars. In addition, the table on the left shows the 12 priority zones that DOT has identified for phase 1 of the NEVI program. Each location is broken out by corridor segment, and by location, you will see this chart referenced in the LOI form. In order for a corridor to be fully built out, a site needs to meet the minimum NEVI standard of have at least 4 150 kW ports, a minimum of at least 600 kilowatts per site of available power for chargers, and be located 1 drivable mile from the end of an exit ramp off an alternative fuel corridor. I want to note here that for the Plainfield zones along I-395, there are 2 locations listed as priority areas, but DOT will be allowing the application process to determine which location gets awarded. So even though there are 12 locations listed, we will only be funding 11 locations for the phase 1 of the program. In addition, I want to point out that we have a sentence within the LOI that seems to be causing some confusion for folks. Phase 1 funds will be prioritized for proposals within the 12 zones. DOT may consider exceptions for unique proposals near these identified zones, but within a drivable mile of an interstate off-ramp. What this means is maybe you found what you considered a perfect NEVI site location, but it's not on one of the exits identified, but it's maybe 1 exit up or down from X priority area, but still within a mile of the alternative fuel corridors. Connecticut DOT may consider that site during phase 1 site evaluations, but there needs to be supporting evidence to back up the justification of that location. Also, just so you know, DOT will not be able to make any exceptions for sites that are further than 1 mile drivable distance from the interstate due to the rules set forth within the federal minimum standards. And I want everyone to know that the scoring criteria for site selection will be made available as part of the second phase of the solicitation process, which is a request for proposals, or RFP, which we plan to release in early 2024. All right, so before we get into the weeds on the LOI and what the purpose is of the LOI, we want everyone to understand that the requirements that are listed here are what you will be committing to if you choose to apply for funding for EV charging infrastructure under the NEVI program. Respondents will be required to complete a 2-step competitive solicitation process, which Jackie's going to go over in a moment. And this first step being inputting your site-specific information into the LOI form and submitting the form to Connecticut DOT. It will be required that all requirements outlined in the final NEVI rule 23 CFR 680 will be upheld. This is the reference to those NEVI minimum standards that you'll have heard me talking about and you'll continue hearing about throughout this presentation. In addition, all applicants must accept the grant terms and conditions without negotiation. As for funding, the Connecticut NEVI program will be administered as a federal aid highway program, which caps federal participation at 80% of total eligible costs. The respondent must demonstrate a financial plan to meet the remaining 20% matching fund requirements. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jackie, who will go through the LOI process.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jackie Murdoch. I'm serving as one of the planning leads on the consultant team supporting Connecticut DOT on delivering the NEVI program. Today, I'll be walking through the LOI process. The LOI is meant to really serve as a self-assessment for potential applicants that is ensuring compliance with federal regulations and Connecticut's NEVI implementation plan that Jen was just referring to. This approach allows applicants to gauge their project readiness at a high level through this LOI process and also provides Connecticut DOT an opportunity to gain some valuable feedback from the industry. As you see here on the screen, the application process is structured in 2 stages. This initial letter of intent that's currently released is going to be followed up later with a request for proposals, an RFP. Both steps are required, and this webinar is centered around the LOI stage, which is now open. Okay, what is an LOI and why is it required? So I just was referring a little bit to this, but again, the application process, like I mentioned, is structured in 2 stages, the initial LOI to be followed up by an RFP in early 2024. And this webinar is really centered around that LOI stage, again, that's published on the Connecticut DOT NEVI website. And we'll be discussing the RFP in greater detail at a later date. All right, so let's get into the details. So the LOI submissions, Connecticut DOT is accepting LOIs between September 28th, last week, and November 9th of this year. The LOIs are going to be accepted on the Microsoft Forms platform with hyperlinks and other technical resources to be provided on Connecticut's NEVI website. You will notice on the website that there are application instructions. So as you're filling out that Microsoft form, make sure that you are also clicking on the application instructions as well. That provides a little bit of context and instructions to fill out the Microsoft form. There are 2 office hours that have been established that the Connecticut DOT will be helping to support applicants during the LOI process. The first is on October 11th at 9 Eastern. You see the Zoom sign up link here. The second is on October 23rd at noon Eastern. Again, the sign up link is here for those office hours. So let's talk a little bit about the submission format. I mentioned that it's a Microsoft form that's posted on the Connecticut NEVI website. There's the LOI instructions that accompany that. And then after you submit your Microsoft form, you'll be getting an email from Connecticut-DOT EV planning at connecticut.gov that will confirm your submission and request the 2 attachments. The first attachment being a map of where your charger will be located at the site, and the other attachment being the site host agreement letter, if applicable. So when you submit that Microsoft form, please do look for that email from that email address, Connecticut CT-DOT EV planning at connecticut.gov. If you do not see that email after you submit, please reach out and contact that same email address to follow up to ensure that we have your LOI. All right, so let's talk about, again, what we've been drilling down to a little bit on some of the resources for the LOI. First and most importantly, applicants will need to ensure that they understand and meet the federal and state requirements. These requirements cover site specifications, equipment standards, operation and maintenance guidelines, among others. And really what we're doing here on this slide is giving you some links that should also be in the chat, some of those key resources to assist you in filling out our Microsoft form there for the LOI. There's also FAQs provided by FHWA and a link to Connecticut's charging ahead plan there on the slide. Okay, so the Microsoft form, this gives you an overview of the major headers in the LOI. And we're going to talk a little bit about the types of information to be requested in the LOI and the subsequent slides here. These topics include general information about the applicant, the eligibility of both the applicant and the potential site location per federal regulations and the Connecticut NEVI plan. And they also will include information regarding, again, site readiness of the site, proposed project funding, technical specifications of the EVSE equipment, and information on the future operations and maintenance of the site. I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea now to dive in on some of those details.
Thank you, Jackie, and thanks, Jen. Make sure my video is on. That. All right. My name is Chelsea Zakis. I am an environmental planner with Fuss & O'Neill, and I am going to go into more detail on some of the content that is being asked for in the LOI, starting with the site location. After you fill out your contact information as the applicant in Section 1, the LOI asks for details on the site location. We'll want to know, is the proposed location within an existing business property? For example, does it share the site with an existing retailer or gas station? If yes, you'll provide brief details as to how the EV charger is related to the existing business. And then, of course, the LOI asks for the address of the proposed site in the typical street, town, state, zip code format. Site location continued, the LOI asks the applicant to provide the coordinates for where the EV chargers are proposed to be located on the site. The LOI provides a link to a coordinates tool, and when you select that link, it will open a page that looks like the screenshot here on the slide. Instructions are included on the left-hand side of the screen, and you'll start by typing in the address of the site. And then once the map is zoomed into your location, you'll select the pin tool and click on the map as precisely as possible where the EV chargers will be located on the site. Once you drop the pin, the coordinates of the location will be provided at the bottom of the screen, and you'll include those coordinates in the LOI. And then finally, with site location continued, the next step is a yes or no question confirming whether or not your proposed location is within one of the NEVI priority zones that were mentioned earlier. A link is provided in the LOI form, and it will bring you to the mapping tool that's shown here on the screen. It is intended to help you identify your project location relative to the priority zones. To use the tool, you'll enter a street address or latitude, longitude coordinates at the top, and then the tool will navigate to that location on the map. You can use the draw tool in the upper right-hand corner to draw the approximate boundaries of your proposed site. But most importantly, the print tool at the bottom right will allow you to create a map of your screen view in a variety of file formats, PDF, JPEG. And when you submit your LOI form, as Jackie was just mentioning, you'll receive a confirmation email that you will then reply to with the attached map discussed here. And then finally, the last question regarding the site location asks, is the entrance to the proposed site located within 1 drivable mile of an exit ramp off of an alternative fuel corridor or AFC, but outside one of the phase 1 priority zones? If yes, provide a brief justification as to why that site should still be considered. And just to reiterate what Jen was discussing earlier, phase 1 funding will be prioritized for proposals within the 12 priority zones. However, DOT may consider exceptions for unique proposals near these identified zones. Section 3 in the LOI is site host information. The LOI will ask for site host contact information. This may or may not be the same contact information provided in the beginning of the LOI under applicant contact information. The last question in this section asks the applicant to confirm whether or not they are the site owner, and if not, do you have a site agreement in place? If you do have an agreement in place with the site owner, we ask that you provide that information as an attachment when you reply to the confirmation email. And if you do not have an agreement in place, this is something that you should be in the process of, because a site agreement will be mandatory when submitting the RFP. For site and project details, section 4, the LOI asks for details on the proposed project. The LOI asks for the number of proposed ports per FHWA requirements. This cannot be less than 4 per location. The LOI asks for the power provided. This number must be greater than or equal to 600 because FHWA requires each port be a minimum of 150 kW or greater. With a minimum of 4 ports, this total number will be 600 kW or greater, depending on the number of proposed ports and power provided. Next is the estimated cost. This is the estimated cost to provide a fully functional EV charging location at the proposed power level with the proposed number of ports. This does not include the operating and maintenance projected costs. Next is the requested grant amount. This is the amount of grant funds requested to provide a fully functional EV charging location at the proposed power level with the proposed number of ports. This amount cannot be more than 80% of the estimated cost of the total project determined in the previous step, because a 20% match is required. And then finally, please include the estimated 5-year operations and maintenance cost. For eligibility, the LOI application will ask you to identify which of these 3 general categories the applicant fits into. As Jen mentioned earlier, eligible entities, as indicated in the NEVI final rulemaking, include but are not limited to businesses, examples being corporations, partnerships, sole proprietorships, and limited liability companies, government-owned entities such as municipalities, state agencies, universities, and community colleges, and tribal governments that are also eligible to apply. Section 6 is about site readiness. The LOI asks whether or not the applicant can meet the minimum mentioned earlier, we strongly encourage applicants to be familiar with the federal regulatory requirements. In addition, the LOI does ask, has the applicant coordinated with the electric utility? While this is a yes or no answer for the LOI, it will be required when submitting the RFP to show proof that you have met with the utility to review design plans and to ensure the location can handle the load capacity that's being proposed. Number 7, section 7 is about the categorical exclusion assessment. To support the anticipated categorical exclusion determination, the LOI asks to provide the following information: whether or not the site is located in a floodplain, near habitats of endangered species or identified biodiversity areas, in potential wetland resource areas, or at or near a National Register of Historic Places site. The LOI form provides links to web-based mapping tools that will make it really easy to determine these things. This is intended to be an informative screening level exercise for the applicant to better understand potential site constraints, but it will ultimately be DOT's responsibility to double check all of this information. Lastly, we have provided some links here to some very helpful federal resources regarding categorical exclusions that we encourage interested applicants to review. Section 8 is about the funding source. You should make sure that you have identified a funding source for the required non-federal match for the project. As mentioned earlier, the NEVI program will cover up to 80% of eligible project costs. The LOI asks you to confirm that you can commit to the 20% match requirement and to provide a brief plan to meet the required match. The 20% match must be non-federal and cannot include an in-kind match such as staff hours. We do encourage applicants to refer to the eligible project costs indicated in the NEVI final rulemaking. However, specifics on eligible covered project costs will be determined in more detail in the RFP. Section 9 is about equipment. For the LOI, we're asking that the applicant confirm yes or no as to whether or not the applicant can meet the federal regulatory requirements for equipment. More details related to equipment will be expected in the RFP. And then Section 10 will be the final content section in the LOI related to operation and maintenance. The LOI asks 4 yes or no questions specific to operations and maintenance. The federal government has stated that each charging port needs to have an average annual uptime of greater than 97%. These uptime requirements will affect all federally funded chargers, and this is to help ensure that chargers are working when drivers need them to. It will be a requirement that all participants in the NEVI program will need to agree to uphold in order to be part of the NEVI program. There are exceptions that are listed in the guidance. Existing NEVI guidance states that charging operators will not be penalized for outages beyond their control, such as utility service interruptions, internet or cellular service provider interruptions, or outages caused by vehicles. However, operators will need to be able to validate that downtime was not their fault. Connecticut DOT is very interested in operation and maintenance plans because they want to ensure the charging network will be viable for years to come. We are particularly interested in plans detailing operation and maintenance, costs associated with operation and maintenance, and plans around service maintenance contracts. More details on operation and maintenance will be expected in the RFP. And then some final notes about submitting the LOI, reiterating a couple of things that Jackie had mentioned earlier. We highly encourage applicants to save a local copy of your complete application. Upon submitting the LOI, there will be an opportunity to print or save your responses. And then in addition, after submitting the LOI, you'll receive a confirmation email that includes a copy of your responses. So you could save a copy of that. You should receive a confirmation email no more than 24 hours after submitting the LOI. If you do not receive a confirmation email, send an email to ct-dot-evplanning@ct.gov. On the CT NEVI website, as Jackie was just mentioning earlier, there is a PDF linked above the LOI form titled Letter of Intent NEVI Program Funding. And these are the LOI instructions. And we encourage interested applicants to review this document. You'll find useful information in there about all of the content asked, and then including the naming conventions that we're requesting for the attachments that you will submit. And then finally, paper copies of the LOI will not be accepted. If for any reason you're having any trouble accessing the form link, please email again ct-dot-evplanning, and please do not send any marketing materials or brochures. I'll pass it back over to Jen.
All right. So the application is live right now, and it will be due back to us on or before November 9th. The LOI responses will come directly into Connecticut DOT, and it will allow DOT an opportunity to provide feedback to respondents ahead of the request for proposals solicitation, which we mentioned is expected to release in early 2024. If you fill out an LOI, you can expect to be contacted by email by the Connecticut DOT. So with that, that pretty much concludes our presentation for today. We look forward to hearing your questions, and I believe our moderator has been keeping track of questions that have been coming in. And so we'll spend some time now talking about the questions.
Thanks, Jen. We're going to start with our first question, which is, will the priority areas on this web map be made available for shapefile download for use on ArcGIS desktop? And that's referring to the NEVI priority zone mapping tool.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The layer is not downloadable, but the tool that we referenced in today's webinar and on our LOI instructions and so forth, you can use that to find the location and take screenshots and things of that sort.
Thank you. So our next question, are respondents required to have a site host agreement in place in order to respond to the LOI?
Great question. The short answer is no. Site host agreements are not required at this time. But if you have them, we would love to see them. And we want to let people know if you don't have it, you really should be working on it because they are going to be required in the RFP. And we don't want anyone's application being held up because they don't have one in place. So a call to action if you don't have it. But thanks for that question.
All right, our next question, how detailed do we need to be in the LOI? For example, can we give a rough estimate on federal, non-federal match?
Yeah, I think that the best thing that we're looking for is the information and level of detail that you have at this time. We would love more information, but not everyone's going to be at the same along the same process, like at the same stage. So the information that you have, the best level of detail would be great. But note that the non-federal match may be not any less than 20%, or not any not any less than 20%.
Great, thank you. Will any documentation from the utility attached do we need any documentation from the utility attached to the LOI?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The LOI does not require official documentation at this stage. There is an LOI question that asks, has the applicant coordinated with the electric utility prior to submission to determine the cost and the schedule for utility interconnection? So we ask that you provide an answer to that question, but we'll be asking for more of that when we release the RFP in early 2024, but thank you for that.
Our next question says, there are multiple I-95 entrances and exits within New London. We have identified the most advantageous I-95 entrances and exits that a NEVI can be installed within the 1 mile restriction. The property is owned by the municipality. Can the city submit an application using said location as a basis for its application?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we're gonna have to look at these as a case-by-case basis, but we definitely would need to see a letter of commitment from the city to use the right-of-way. But I mean, that would be clearly identified within the RFP process. So yeah, we welcome all applicants that are eligible to apply. Thanks for that.
Okay, next question. Could Connecticut DOT please clarify the definition of owner? If the site host and charging station operator are the same entity, is there still a requirement to provide the details of the lease and or confirmation from the REIT? And I'm sorry if I don't know that acronym. This requirement makes sense for proposals where the site host and applicant are different entities, but not when the site host and applicant are the same.
Okay. So a clarification on site host agreements. When in doubt, maybe just send us your site host agreement. But like I said, it's not mandatory for the LOI to have your site host agreement in place right now. But that will be required for the RFP. So that's maybe on a case-by-case basis. You could definitely reach out and talk to us about that. We'd be happy to help sort that out.
Okay, thanks. And a few more questions related to site hosts. Can you confirm? It says, can you confirm is, but I think it's supposed to be, can you confirm if a signed site host letter of intent or if a formal site host memorandum of understanding executed site agreement, I believe is required. So I believe what this is asking is, does something have to be signed at this point?
We would like a signed letter, but it is not required at this point. If you have it, we please ask you to attach it to the email that you'll be getting, but it is like something that will be required later on.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Will equipment specifications be uploaded to support the equipment eligibility?
Yeah, so the federal minimum, the federal NEVI minimum standards give specific guidance on equipment specifications requirements. I would reference those. We're not asking for any additional information or attachments at this time about equipment specifications, but going back to that guidance and ensuring your equipment meets all the minimum standards will be helpful as you move forward in the grant and solicitation process. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Jen. And I just want to encourage anyone who put a question into the chat, if you could take that question and copy it or retype it into the question and answer, that allows us to record that and be able to have a record of that. So if you've entered a question into the chat, we definitely want to capture everybody's questions. If you're able to put that into the Q&A now, we'd really appreciate that. So just want to mention that. And then our next question is, will LOI submissions be treated as confidential given the requirements for estimates?
Thank you for that question. I don't have an exact answer on that. We did get a question earlier as if the people who fill out an LOI application, if we will list those, and I think that's undetermined. I think I would have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is the time requirement for the maintenance contract? The 5-year term or longer?
Let's see. The NEVI program allows for a 5-year timeline at minimum operation and maintenance. We have not decided yet if we're going to do what we're going to do for operation and maintenance. At this time, we're in the process, we're just looking for numbers from folks of what they were thinking. So those details would be outlined within the RFP.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can we include photos of the equipment with the LOI, or would this be considered marketing?
Photos of the equipment, is that was a question?
Yes, photos of the equipment.
Yeah, I don't think we need photos of the equipment. We do need where the equipment will sit on the site. So that would be helpful. And I do want to mention this program is reimbursement program. So you can't order any equipment or any materials till after you have a signed contract that you have been awarded funds. So just a FYI on that.
Okay, next question. Is a deed needed in place of site host agreement if we own the site? Oh, is a deed needed in place of a site host agreement if we own the site?
That is a good question. I don't have an answer off the top of my head. I think that will be outlined within the RFP further down the line. But right now, for the LOI, that would not be required.
Okay, next question. Are there any binding commitments being made in the LOI? For example, if we make changes to federal match or project partners between LOI and RFP, will it need to go through a change process or procedure?
So the LOI is per site. So if you change the site, that could be problematic because each site will need its own application. Outside of that, I think that we would have to evaluate. I don't know if I have a question. I have an answer on the top of my head for that one. We would have to get back to them on that.
Okay, next question. How will Connecticut ensure that products are, in fact, Buy American compliant during this process? We have seen several products being awarded NEVI grants over the last month whose compliance is questionable.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We already have at Connecticut DOT a process set up for ensuring Buy American. So we will be following that process and it's working with our division office to ensure that that process will carry over for our NEVI program. But folks will have to sign a piece of paper and they could be in jeopardy of losing their award if they were awarded something. So, but thank you for that concern, but that's something definitely that will be outlined within our RFP.
Our next question is, can you confirm if a non-binding site host letter of intent or a binding site host MOU is required?
Binding. Oh, this feels like legal territory where I could get in trouble. If you have a site letter agreement, please provide it. If later we need additional information, we will ask for it. Like I mentioned, it's not required for this LOI part of the application, but it's going to be required, and we'll explain it in much more detail in the RFP.
Okay, our next question. Would it be possible to make the priority areas downloadable as a shapefile? My organization has enough potential sites that inputting each address manually on the tool doesn't make sense. I'd like to be able to use a search by location to narrow down our possibilities.
Well, I'm super excited you have that many stations that you can't manually input them. That's like very exciting as like a program lead to hear that. On the flip side, currently right now, we don't have it as an option to download it. I don't know if we could find a workaround that, but maybe that's something we could discuss further on. But thank you for that suggestion, and we'll look into that. But right now, unfortunately, that's not an option for us. Thanks.
Okay, and we have one more question in the chat. So before I list that, I just want to encourage people, if you have any additional questions you'd like to include, go ahead and get those in the Q&A now, and we'll get to them. But the last question we have open right now is as follows. As a requirement of the RFP, will a site host letter of intent be accepted in lieu of a full site host lease agreement and/or purchase and sale agreement?
This is a hot topic. Thank you for this question. I'm going to reiterate, send us what you have, and we'll let you know. This is the whole point of this process. The LOI is to be able to see what information you have, and DOT to be able to say, okay, this isn't exactly what we were looking for. This could be problematic for your application, and give you that feedback. So send what you have, and we'll let you know if that's the kind of information we're looking for. I hope that helps.
And that is everything we have in the question and answer right now. We can leave it open.
Okay.
And I just want to say thank you to folks who had put questions in the chat, who then went ahead and put them in the Q&A. We really do appreciate that. That keeps it, makes it much easier for us to keep track of all the questions, so that we can share those and understand, what are the things that people are most concerned about. So we can wait a few more moments, Jen, if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I do have a follow-up.
And you have, okay, great.
On one of the questions, I think the question was, will the LOI submission be treated as confidential given the requirements for estimates? I was kind of wavering on that. But I've heard that the confidentiality, the information that's submitted during the LOI and the RFP process is considered commercially confidential, but that further down the line, when the RFP is issued and if an award is given, then all information must be made public at that time. So I just want to follow back on that because I didn't have a solid answer when that question came in.
Great, thank you for that follow-up. I still don't see any additional questions at this point.
Okay.
I believe we have one more slide with some.
We have one
next
more
steps.
slide.
Okay, let's share that. Okay.
To wrap it up. So the LOI is open right now, and our submissions need to be in by November 9th. We'll be hosting our open office hours on October 11th and October 23rd to answer questions people have about the LOI or the NEVI program in general. The links for the registration for those open office hours are listed here. We're asking that all questions on the LOI be submitted to Connecticut DOT before November 3rd, so we can ensure that we have enough time to respond to all requests. In addition, please don't hesitate to reach out anytime by email if you haven't already. I highly recommend signing up for email updates on our website. I want to thank everyone for joining us today to learn about NEVI's grant solicitation process. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your project proposals coming in, and enjoy the day. Thanks so much.